Hey guys, welcome back to the Tech Check for Season 2, Episode 14. Before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor.
Today's sponsor is Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. It has creation tools that allows you to create and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. Anchor also distributes your podcast for you on multiple platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can make money with no minimum listenership, and everything is in one place to create a podcast. Download Anchor on the App Store or Play Store, or you can go to anchor.fm to create your podcast today.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Tech Check. Today we have the CEO of Weave, Vivek. So, Vivek, what do you wanna talk about with us today?
Hey guys, happy to be here. Like you said, I'm the CEO of Weeve. Weeve is a employee experience platform. We help people leaders to build stronger relationships with their employees. So our product is based around what we call a empathetic AI chatbot. Her name is Kim. She has organic conversations with employees to understand their issues and needs. She's not like your normal kind of chatbot that you're used to. We're built on a lot of very interesting natural language processing and AI technologies. We're able to intelligently ask follow-up questions. We can route people to the right resources. We can understand topics and escalate issues to the right leader so that employee issues can be resolved as quickly as possible.
Vivek, I'm just wondering, what inspired the foundation of Weave?
That's a good question. So before I started Weave in my previous life, I was a Big Four consultant, and my job was going from company to company, um, uh, doing different kinds of technology products in the enterprise web portal and AI space. But I started to notice a trend, which was no matter what company I went to, no matter what industry or the size, there's a pattern of a growing disconnect between employees and leaders. And that disconnect was causing issues in projects, projects to fail, uh, and it was stemming from a variety of things. There are changing technologies, there's new relationships between employees and company, changes in loyalty, and most recently, massive changes in the way that we work from the pandemic. But regardless of what the cause is, the impact is the same, that less of a connection between employees and leaders, less of organic interaction results in unhappier employees and failures of projects and companies to struggle. So the question became, how do we build more organic and stronger employee leader relationships, and how can we automate that to work at a large scale? And that's where Weave came in.
Uh, when I was just doing some external research, I found that there are other companies that are doing similar things like AceBot and SurveyMonkey and stuff like that.
Mhm.
What makes Weave unique and different compared to those other companies?
Yep. So the employee engagement space has a couple different categories of players, the way that we look at it. You've got your very traditional survey players. These are guys that kind of specialize. They've been around for 80 some odd years. They specialize in really research-backed question sets. They're very analytics and metrics driven. So you're going to be doing like a once a year survey that's going to have a ton of questions. You're going to get a bunch of data and then take actions based off of that. Your next category is your more what we call pulse survey players. So these are companies that have popped up in the last 5 to 10 years. They are a little bit more agile in their approach. So rather than doing a big check-in with employees on a very long cycle, they're doing monthly or bi-weekly or weekly check-ins with employees, asking smaller amounts of questions, kind of understanding more of what's happening on the ground, and focusing more on quicker turnarounds. And then your next category is what we fall into, which is your more intelligent, advanced kinds of data collection. So where you're having more organic conversation with people in order to understand what's going on. Now the space that we're in is quite like our category, there's not too many players. It's pretty nascent. Uh, um, so let me explain the differences for each of those categories. The big difference we have from the traditional guys is that they're on average spending 1.5 years getting from the point of time of when you identify an employee's need to actually resolving it. Because you're running a survey once a year, that data is being collected by leaders, it's being turned into reports that go up to management. You're creating action plans from that, disseminating that down to middle leaders, and then finally taking action on it. It's a huge cycle, and it's really more meant to get metrics across long periods of time rather than taking action. Then you've got your next category, which is your pulse survey guys. So these guys are better at making that cycle a little bit faster, but where they still struggle is in data quality and in engaging with the employee. There's burnout because people don't like answering questions to a black box where they don't think they're going to see any positive result. The questions are often surface level. They're not digging into the root of employee needs. And it ends up being an experience that most employees don't like. The area that we're in, we focus on a couple of things. One is extremely fast issue to action timelines. So on average, we reduce the issue to action speed by more than 18x by not only understanding employee needs, getting it to the right leader at the right time, but we can also route people to the right internal resources. So say Kim, our chatbot, is having a conversation with an employee to understand their work situation with the shift to remote work. And that employee reveals that they just don't have the right work environment. Their internet speed is not fast enough. They've got an uncomfortable office chair. They're unable to adequately attend their Zoom meetings. At that moment, we can route them in real time to, hey, by the way, your company has a work from home subsidy so that you can improve this space. Or another example, if there's an employee that's talking about having a tough time dealing with the shift from a mental or emotional angle, we can route them to, hey, your company has a counseling service specifically for this. So we're very quickly getting people to where they need rather than doing these huge runarounds. Obviously, the other big benefit that we have is that the conversation itself is quite organic, and we're able to dive in real time rather than you ask a set of questions, someone else analyzes it, and then you go back to the employee to ask again. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that definitely does. So this is kind of like a follow-up to what you just responded. So I know you spoke about like Kim asking like deeper questions and a faster response time, but how does your system motivate people to like open up Kim like someone would with like a normal person?
Yep. That's a very important point, and usually the first question that we get from prospective clients, how do we build trust in the process? And that's really the answer to it. We're not trying to build trust in a tool, right? We're not trying to just build trust independently in Kim, but the relationship that we want leaders to be able to build with employees is employees know if they interact with Kim, they're going to see timely response to their needs. And from a leader's perspective, they know that if they participate in our process, they're not going to have to kind of struggle around aimlessly to know how to be responsive. So we do a couple of things. First, Kim is going to reach out, understand what employees' needs are through conversation, route people to the right internal resources where relevant, and escalate relevant issues up to management. Then, if management doesn't know what to do about a particular issue, Kim can actually reach back out to employees and crowdsource suggestions for improvement, essentially kicking off action planning from a manager and giving you a set of actions that are guaranteed to be effective because they're coming from the employees. Finally, we have a broadcasting functionality. So once a manager starts to take action, Kim can broadcast back out to the team saying, hey, you told me about this issue, and this is what your manager is doing about it. So to take a really simple example, we have a client that's a large hospital system, and their nurses, their night shift nurses, were losing their minds. They're going crazy because the break room was always stocked with stale leftovers from day shift. It's the kind of issue that the managers who weren't working night shift didn't know about. They weren't aware about it and never would have rang as something that's important. But it was having a big impact on the mental state of these nurses, especially right now during the pandemic. And it's ultimately an extremely cheap problem for leadership to fix. They just needed to know that it existed and to give employees the right pipeline in order to talk about that need. So very quickly, once Kim uncovered that issue, management was able to send a broadcast back out to the team within 24 hours saying, hey, we heard you. We're going to make sure that you've always got fresh stock coming in right at the start of your shift. What that does is over time, you build a relationship where maybe I, as an employee, didn't trust talking to Kim would mean anything at first, but I start to see that, okay, Kim keeps reaching out back out to me and saying, based off of what my peers were saying, these changes have occurred in the workplace. And it builds a relationship where you know there's going to be change if you participate.
So just to make that clear, you're not really trying to build a relationship between Kim and the employee, but rather the employee and the employer through Kim.
That's right. Kim is just a tool that enables leaders to be effective at scale. So if you're a team, if you're a company that's managing 5 people, I can go and sit down and have the same conversation with every single person, and it's possible. But if I'm a 50,000 person company, I can't have that same thing face to face every single time. That's where Kim becomes very effective.
So does Kim actually perform any sort of emotional analysis of an employee? And if so, how does that necessarily work, considering that it's a non-human,
Yep.
tool measuring emotional analysis, doing an emotional analysis of a person?
That's a good question. So we do a couple forms of emotional analysis, sentiment analysis, topic analysis. There's underlying AI models that we use. So partly we use IBM Watson, partly we have some models that are built on Microsoft's language understanding system, and partly they're custom models that are in Python. So we take combinations of all of those outputs from different classification models to kind of arrive at a confident enough result in the emotion of what someone is saying. And we use that emotional data to know what's important to route upwards, to know how to respond to someone in a way that kind of feels organic and tells us when to ask the right follow-up questions. Right now we measure across, I want to say 5 emotions, things like anger, joy, satisfaction, frustration, etc.
So with the whole pandemic going on, the whole COVID-19 pandemic, I was just wondering how this pandemic affected Weave.
It was a big impact. I'm sure it was for many businesses. For us, in some interesting ways. So one, it was obviously a big shakeup right when things started, like in March, just from like a budget and pipeline standpoint. We saw a lot of people were panicking, pulling deals, and that kind of stuff. So we had to do some pretty quick pivots. In the longer term, I think for people in our industry, it's actually a good thing. And I think for employees, it's probably a good thing in the sense of employers are taking the employee experience much more seriously now. And they're investing a lot more money into making sure that employee morale is high, that they're happy and motivated. And because a large percentage of the workforce is going to continue to be remote post the pandemic, tools like ours become much more essential, where you're not having those like casual interactions in the hallways anymore. There needs to be a more process approach in connecting employees to leaders.
Awesome. So how do you hope to evolve your company in the coming future?
So the name of the company is Weave, and the idea is we want to kind of weave together employees to leaders, the different resources in a company. We basically want to be the front end of the employee experience. So we're starting to explore that through routing to different internal resources, like going, telling people that there's a program that they can use in the company for a subsidy, routing people to counselors, getting them mentors, connecting to the rewards and recognition programs. So I think in the midterm, a lot of our focus is going to be on building out more of those integrations and connections, so that from an employee's point of view, if they need to get an issue resolved, if they had a win or a success, if they need to ask a question, all of those interactions can happen through Kim.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move on to like automation and AI as a whole. Obviously, us three aren't necessarily experts or professionals in the field of AI, so we just want to get some your more expert opinion on it. So, with technology like that in Kim, what other industries or fields would benefit from this sort of emotional intelligence AI?
Emotional intelligence AI, and more broadly, natural language processing. We're at a pretty exciting time for it. We're seeing some pretty monumental jumps in terms of language understanding and language generation and language classification capabilities. So we actually use NLP in right now somewhat uncommon way. There's a lot of areas where you see natural language processing being used for things like analyzing trends on social media. We see governments are using natural language processing to understand sentiment of their citizens and what kinds of policies are going to be popular. We see it being used pretty much anywhere where you have large quantities of written or verbal data. So we're in the early stages of using natural language processing to write articles. So you might see some articles these days, usually not very good ones, but you will start to see them of like news reports that are written partially or even completely by AI. You even see it in gaming quite a bit. There's a game that's getting pretty popular. It's called what is it called? AI Dungeon or something like that, I think, which actually has very, very cutting edge natural language processing under the hood. It's one of the easiest ways for someone that's not in the space to kind of play around with it, where it's a text adventure that's being entirely generated on the fly every single time you talk to it. There's no pre-written story in it. And you can respond completely colloquially and it will take you down the route. So I think more and more we're going to start to see this technology all over the place. The two main areas from like an average person's perspective, I think is going to be the way that you interact with different software is going to start to become much more natural language. So it'll be more like talking to a Google Assistant or a Siri. And more, this is already happening at large scales. Any data that you're freely putting out into the world is going to be analyzed by natural language algorithms. And that's something we should be cognizant of.
So I guess if there was anyone or any problem or challenge that you could identify about automation as a whole, what do you think it would be?
Challenge in the sense of like the everyday person, or more from like,
I guess more from like the AI perspective.
I think the challenge is some of the inherent limitations in AI. So like creative decision making. Most importantly, like knowing where the human has to be in the process. So most AI systems, you're not just going to like let them run wild by themselves. You have someone that's involved in the training stages, and someone that's helping it to incrementally and continually improve. So knowing where to have that human in, where it's important to make manual tweaks, is something that I think is critical and an ongoing question.
Yeah, I guess on the flip side of that, where would you think the problems with AI would occur when it comes to integrating AI into everyday society? Like, what challenges do you think that, like you said before, the average person would face when AI becomes more integrated into life around them?
I think we see it a lot from recommendation algorithms right now. We see that people get pushed by algorithms into like echo spaces. I think that's a pretty real threat to society. Um, in terms of other impacts, uh, I think there's kind of like a more philosophical question that we're going to start thinking about more and more seriously, of like what interactions need to be human versus where are we just shuffling the thinking off to a machine. And by the time the majority of the populace starts thinking about this question seriously, we may have reached a point that's too far to backpedal. For example, at this point, I think we've lost the privacy fight. We've already given our data, and we can't go back from that. And we may be entering the same kind of space in more areas that are AI driven.
Awesome. So the one of my final questions that I had is what advice would you have for a student that wants to go into AI? And is there any skills that you need if you want to enter this field?
Yeah, so AI is incredibly broad. The good thing is that a lot of you don't have to be as deep tech to play around in the world of AI anymore. There's a lot of frameworks that are built where you can interact with AI and you can have a career in AI while being more high level. I'd say in general, understand the areas that you're interested in, and then do research on who's doing work in those areas. Try and talk directly to those people. It's such a broad spectrum that, like, if I'm interested in language generation versus I am more interested in like image classification or like deep faking, like they're very different worlds. There are experts in all of them, and usually those experts are willing to spend 20 minutes with you and teach you about it.
Thank you. I guess as a sort of a final question, where could we, reach out to Weave if anybody's interested? Where could we find, ways to contact you or anybody else in the company as a whole?
Yep, you can visit our website. That's weeve.ai, weeve.ai, or you can always email me directly, Vivek at weeve.ai. That's VIVEK at weeve.ai.
Thank you. Vivek, I just want to thank you for, hopping on the podcast today. Again, we're going to put all of his information in the description of, if this is on YouTube, on YouTube description. We're also going to put him on all of our social media, so you can probably find his contacts there as well. Vivek, thanks again. And to our listeners, thank you guys for, listening, and stay tuned for the next one.